Welcome back to our continuing studies in the Gospel of Matthew. And this portion of Matthew, we are dealing with Jesus' presence before Caiaphas. We could call this, in more modern terminology, the pre-trial in a sense. Often, before a trial comes to pass, you have to sit down and look at what do you have and what can you do moving forward with the case. I'm kind of generalizing. I'm not a lawyer, obviously, but before you actually move to the trial proper, you want to have, as it were, all your ducks in a row. And in that sense, what we're saying is that before Jesus could be taken before Pilate, the Roman governor, the things have to be made straight and clear on the Jewish side of things. They did not want to take Jesus to Pilate before they had things lined up, organized, and ordered. Then they would take Jesus to Pilate. In that sense, understand that Jesus could only be crucified because the Jewish leaders had decided his guilt prior to going to Pilate. Pilate, in that sense, forms a very important rubber stamp, but it is the trial with Caiaphas that is a key to Jesus' near future, as it were. Matthew chapter 26 and verses 63 and 64. And I'm going to be reading out of James Moffat, the New Testament and New Translation. A little worse for the wear, but what do you expect? It's about a 90-year-old book at this point. Beginning at verse 63 and reading verse 64 with that. Then the high priest addressed him. I adjure you by the living God, tell us if you are the Christ, the Son of God. Jesus said to him, even so, but I tell you in the future, you will see the Son of Man seated at the right hand of power and coming on the clouds of heaven. We are not told how many people were present in this judgment hearing. We cannot really reconstruct that. It is probable that there was a fairly large-sized crowd. In part, I think Caiaphas desired a measure of legitimacy about the procedures. In other words, if Caiaphas just simply wanted Jesus killed, I think Caiaphas could have ensured that one of his thugs or goons or gangs took care of the issue. It was not ever an issue of just simply killing Jesus. It was having that official sanction that he was unfit by Jewish standards. So when we look at this crowd, we cannot exactly be certain as to the size of the group there. Now, we know from later records that the size of the Sanhedrin was supposed to be 71 at maximum. Were there 71 people present there? I tend to discount that because I think, first and foremost, Caiaphas wanted to make sure that he had people who are going to give him the verdict he desired. There's ways you can make things forward in any meeting by making sure those people are going to not be on the same page of the program with you, do not show up. I think also that given the irregularities of the meeting, the way it was held, I think there's a certain amount of ad hocness about it, and so I don't think it would probably been possible to gather all people at once necessarily. And then possibly we could add that, and this is complete conjecture, if they met over at Caiaphas's place, did Caiaphas actually have the room for a full council? And did they, by that extension, have an actual place where the full council might have met for official business? We can't begin to fully reconstruct things. What we seem to have is a group that was not too large, but diverse enough to include the various factions of Judaism. In other words, it's not just enough to get the priestly authority against Jesus. You would probably want some Pharisees, some scribes, some teachers of the law, people who are called Herodians, whatever their exact function were. Spread it around, as it were. Caiaphas, if we judge from comparable historical examples, was probably concerned that the decision reached would cross the divides of the various factions. So the picture we get is a rather chaotic environment. One person says something, and in various spots of the room, we get maybe 3 counter proposals. There were probably factions in the group wanting to make sure their position was respected. There were probably people every once in a while cursing Jesus. The exact details are unknown, but in the midst of all of this and what is going on, you have Jesus being silent. Jesus has no need to defend himself. Jesus is sure of who he is and knows what he must do. His is not the silence of a person overwhelmed by what is going on around him. Let us be very clear. There is that sort of silence sometimes that people are just completely overwhelmed. That is not Jesus. His is the silence of extreme certainty of who and what he is. Remember, the deal was sealed, so to speak, in the Garden of Gethsemane. He does not get crucified. He goes forth from the garden to take up his cross. I cannot help but think that there were some people in that room who could not help but be impressed by the type of person they saw in Jesus. They might not have gone into that room liking him or agreeing with him, and may never have really moved in that sense forward in terms of acceptance of Jesus, but could not help but be impressed by what they saw in that room. You finally get the reveal in the meeting when the high priest asks who Jesus is. Now, I have to believe this was a tactical move by the high priest. He was trying to, cobble together support, a verdict, a judgment, and all of this. Things weren't really working all that smoothly. So he just steps in and asks Jesus, point blank, a question. In other words, he was not trying to play the straight man off Jesus. That's a term used in comedies. You have a comedic duo. You have one person who's off the cuff and one the straight man. And often those two play off of each other, and that provides the measure of humor. In that sense, the high priest was not trying to play straight man to Jesus. In a way, the high priest probably sought to corner Jesus. Now, how could the high priest corner Jesus? If he asked him point blank, he's the Messiah. Well, if Jesus said no, case closed, let's move on. If Jesus says yes, well, a whole other thing. And point of fact, Jesus does not, let's be clear, in my modern paraphrase of this passage, Jesus does not say yes. He says, why, yes, I am the Messiah. Jesus not only said it, but said it in a way that pushed back at the high priest. There was to be no uncertainty as to who he is. Let us be clear that Jesus was not crucified because he helped little old ladies cross the street, or that Jesus held high teas in the Judean wilderness with 4,000 or 5,000 men and women and children on top of that, or that Jesus was a deep and spiritual teacher. In this passage, we get at why Jesus was crucified. Jesus was crucified because he laid claim to divine prerogatives. You see, those that claim in any era of the church that Jesus did not think he was God, or that the church in some later council met and came to an agreement that Jesus was actually God in the flesh, are completely misguided and naive as to what the record says. Jesus challenged Caiaphas and said, yes, I am the promised one who has come from God. Caiaphas did not have to know the intricacies of the debates of the post-apostolic church fathers on the nature of Jesus to understand what Jesus was saying at that point and what Jesus was claiming. Jesus, in one moment of time, by his claims, ensures that he will be crucified.